Welcome to the brandtuned podcast, David. I'm delighted to have you here today. Tell us a bit more about what you do and what's currently occupying you.
I see. Well, I kind of look through things through a brand perspective. I got into brand equity, 25, 30 years ago now. And when I was interested in strategy and came to the belief that people needed to build assets instead of being focused on short-term financials. And I decided that if I was going to participate, the brand equity is sort of my niche. And so I wrote a book in which I defined it called Managing Brand Equity, and another on how to manage it called Building Strong Brands. And since then, I've written 4 or 5 more books, and it got to be so many books. I wrote a book called Aaker on Branding that sort of summarized everything. And since then, I've gotten interested in the power of stories. So I wrote a book, Creating Signature Stories. And then I try to take a branding view of disruptive innovation and what a brand brings to the party. And I wrote a book called Owning Game-Changing Subcategories. Mm-hmm. And now I'm working on a book about how branding can help firms that want to develop social programs.
Okay, that's interesting. So I've been writing about intellectual property and the fact that it's not really taken into account by a lot of people I come across in the branding industry, which may be the smaller business end of the market, for nearly 10 years. And it's only recently occurred to me that there is no training provided for marketers and business MBA students in intellectual property. Is that the same in the US?
Yeah, that's one of my blind spots. I have developed several models or ideas, and I've never registered their trademarks, and I've been completely derelict. And I've had really nobody to tell me that until you came along. Yeah, and my book gets copyrighted because of and articles because of the publisher and so on. But yeah, I just have really a blind spot in that area, and I think you're absolutely correct that it needs to be it needs to have more focus, more expertise.
Yeah. I'm just wondering why it's not included in the training programs, like especially for brand managers.
Well, I think it's because people like me that are doing the intellectual sort of work don't have any background in it, and so it's sort of a chicken and an egg thing. If we don't have any background, we don't even recognize it's a problem or a need.
Right. And does Profit create brands for people? Your agency, do they create brands? What sort of work do they do for clients?
Well, brand strategy and sort of building brand equity is sort of our core offering, and it's sort of our legacy offering. That's how we got to be known. We now do design, we do naming, but we also do helping people do digital transformations, helping them understand how to change their culture. We do analytical things. We do customer experience, and so we now do quite a broad set of offerings, but it's still maybe brand strategy is at the core of a third or a half of what we do.
Okay. So when a name is being proposed for a client, are you aware what sort of checks are made or whether you involve lawyers in the process?
Yeah, we have a naming group within our company, and I don't get involved in that, but there's no way that you can avoid the legal aspect of naming, which is, of course, as you know, pretty complicated, since most of the brands need to have a global brand, and they need to own it globally.
Are you aware of whether they have lawyers on their team or whether they outsource, how they work with lawyers at
No,
all?
I don't know how they do it, but there's no question that that's one area in which the legal side
It's taken care of.
is known by everybody to be needed.
Yeah, I guess what I notice is that often brands are not created using symbols and characters. Maybe there's a little fear in the industry that there will be some sort of infringement problems, maybe because people don't know how to search and, you know, do due diligence. They're just aware there might be a problem. I don't know. That's what I
Yeah,
wonder.
I don't know either. We have a design team of 30 or 40 people and a naming team of half a dozen, and I don't know what I've not ever been involved in what they do, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if they're a little more knowledgeable than I.
Okay, so if I wanted to try and get MBA schools to take IP on board, who is the person who's creating the curriculum? I mean,
Well, that's the problem. There is nobody.
mhm. Well, nobody's creating the curricula.
Well, not of IP, not of the legal side of IP ownership.
Yeah, well, this is why I've written this book, and I hope to, you know, send it to MBA schools and try to raise awareness that it's really important when you're creating a brand to be aware of the IP dimension, because even though marketers, designers are not going to be expected to deal with the IP themselves, you need to know what you don't know, and when you need to bring others in. It's not just clearing names or, you know, there's all sorts of ways in which IP can cause problems with identifiers that are chosen.
I think if I'll give you some free advice, which is
Sure.
probably not worth much, but putting a book out there is not going to do it.
Yeah, well,
But you have to.
What do
What were
I
you going to
do?
say?
What should I do instead?
You need to have some vivid stories about disasters where people have failed to do their legal homework and it's resulted in disaster. You need about 6 or 7 of those, and then you have to get a you know, way to get them out there. And so with all due modesty, I recommend my book, Creating Signature Stories, because
Okay.
I think what you need is signature stories. A book is a good place to establish credibility and to provide a place for people to go for more information, but it's not going to change anything.
Yeah, I have got a number of stories I could share, and I have created videos on it because, but I don't want to be seen as somebody always talking about disasters, really, because but you think it's important to.
I think that's the only way. I think that the book is not going to do it. So I've written books that didn't do it. So
Okay.
I have
Yeah,
some
you've written
background.
lots, haven't you?
People, yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, a book can, again, establish credibility for yourself and for your ideas.
Yeah.
And so when you have a platform, you won't be as easily ignored, but you need stories, I think.
Okay, well, I will be sure to get that book. So you create stories and you share them on video.
Well, you have to find the stories, and
Yeah,
then
I've
you
got
have
plenty.
to present them in a professional way. And it might be on video, it might be on articles. And then the third step is you have to get them in front of people's eyes.
Yeah,
And that's a big communication problem.
yeah,
And so you have to find a vehicle, you have to find a way to break through the clutter, the information overload, and so on, and
yeah.
make sure that it gets out there.
Well, one story which is out there is Tesco, for example. They paid quite a big agency to come up with a name for their loyalty program, and the name chosen was Club Card. They spent at least $1 million raising awareness around Club Card, but they haven't been able to register that as a trademark. It can't function as a trademark, it's too descriptive. And when that happens, it means that everyone else can begin using Club Card, and they can therefore benefit from the advertising that Tesco put into it. You know,
can't they own the name Tesco Club Card?
they can, and that's what they've had to do. But the problem is that they were trying to create a unique name for their loyalty program, but in the process, all they did, because they didn't find a unique name, they found a name that everyone else is using and benefiting from. So they raised the profile of loyalty programs by spending so much money on promoting Club Card, when it's basically promoting something generic that other people can have, which is, you know, there are subtleties like that around IP, which makes it difficult to actually explain why this is a disaster. You know, that you have a name that you can't uniquely own is actually such a waste of resources that went into creating that name. If they'd come up with something like, I don't know, a totally unique name that they could own straight away, then all that advertising promotion that went into their campaigns would be uniquely, would belong to them, and therefore their loyalty card would be more well known than, you know, than other people. Other people would have had to start calling their loyalty cards by some other name plus loyalty card. They couldn't have benefited from Tesco making people aware that, you know, loyalty cards are a good thing, for example. So there's quite a loss for an organization that can't register a trademark for as a unique identifier. And this happens all the time with other elements as well. Like if Coca-Cola had just created a unique bottle, but not bothered to protect it in the right ways, they just wouldn't have had unique use of that Coca-Cola bottle. Other competitors would have been able to use the same bottle shape, which would have then meant that they wouldn't get so much value from it, you know. So it's really part and parcel of what you create is to protect, really. So the brand equity, tell me a bit more about how you work with brand equity.
Well, brand equity is as I defined it, it consists of three things. One is the visibility and credibility of the brand, and that is, do you think of it when you want to consider what brand to buy? Do you think that it's not only comes to mind, but you think in your mind that, yeah, that could work, and it could be one you'd consider. The second thing is the brand image, and that has got all the things that come into how you perceive the brand. It's maybe the organizational values, the brand personality, the brand attributes, the brand benefits, how it's used, the kinds of people that use it, the whether it's if you are sort of inspired by it, are you impressed by it, do you respect it? That all is part of the brand image. And the third thing is the brand loyalty. And that is how many people are really part of the brand community. Are they really have literally they'll always buy it, they'll talk to other people about it, and they'll share information about it. And If you have a core loyal group, that's really an important part of the equity of a brand.
Yeah, so obviously copying is a big problem, because if you develop a positioning and competitors begin to offer the same benefits as you offer, then maybe you just have a point of parity after a while, and there's nothing unique in your positioning. So
Well, I talk about in my disruptive innovation book, only in game changing subcategories, I talk about the role of the brand, and one of the roles of the brand is to build barriers to competition, to prevent just what you're talking about. And there's different kinds of variables. I mean, just getting a loyal customer base is a huge barrier, because they're not going to be tempted by somebody that pretends to duplicate what you do, even whether they do or whether they don't. And a second thing is that you can just continually innovate, so that you're always a moving target. And it's pretty hard for somebody then to say, okay, you want a Prius-like car? Well, we're making one, and Prius and their informed consumers will know, well, yeah, that's what they made 2 years ago, but that's not what they're making now. Another thing you can do is to brand the innovation. And so if you a hotel chain had something called the heavenly bed, and so people rushed to copy it, although other hotels copied it, but there's only one heavenly bed because they own that brand.
Yeah, you see, that's where intellectual property comes in, because it does create barriers to entry through the name. Whatever, people can't say we've got heavenly like beds, they have to find other names.
Yes.
So it protects the brand. And
that's right. So that's what you have then is two levels of branding. You have the brand itself, the name of the hotel, and then you have a branded feature.
Yeah.
And like the retailer Uniqlo has something called Heat Tech, which is a kind of fabric that keeps in the heat. They also have something called Airism, which is fabric that breathes and makes you cool in the summertime. And they they own those names, and so again, all these retailers are trying to copy those qualities, but they can't access the brand name. They can't call it Airism. They can't call it Heat Tech.
And it's possible they also have patents if it's a particular type of fabric. So I'm curious
well,
that
they developed this. Well, they may have patents, I don't know, but they have partners in the industry that develop these that might own the patent, but they own their use of it. And so I don't know about whether they own the patents or not. They might or might not, but they do own the branded feature.
Yeah. So you say that you're not very alive to IP in terms of, because it hasn't been something that you've considered.
No, what I said was I'm not very attuned to the legal side of it.
So you know the importance.
I'm very much involved with IP.
You're involved with, so you would be able to choose a name that you know is likely to function as a trademark.
Well, IP is the ideas that you're trying to put a name on. It's not just the name.
No, it's copyright, it's patents, it's designs.
Well, I'm talking about substance. I'm talking about, what my model of brand equity is, what my model of developing brand equity is, and that they both have names, but anyway, it's a lot more than a name.
Sure, yes. I mean, like a lot of what you said around image can be protected, but some of elements can't be, or loyalty. some aspects of loyalty can't be protected, but some would be. Like if you've got a special site where consumers can discuss whatever it is that the brand offers, then that site is going to be unique to the brand, and others would have to copy. They wouldn't be able to use that site. So there are ways in which IP, I think that might be the problem, actually, the definition of IP. People have different perceptions of what IP actually means. There's IP like your knowledge and expertise, but in terms of legally, it's really about, for brands, it's trademarks are the most important IP. And whether or not you can trademark something matters a lot for brands. So, you know, a brand like Adidas, for example, they start out with their logo, which is very distinctive. They can register that as a trademark, but then they want to have the stripes, and they want to have a monopoly over use of stripes in a particular location of the shoe. So it can be more and more challenging. But a lot of brands who are very successful manage to get quite a big monopoly over their brand elements like that. So
even the color has been trademarked, hasn't it?
yeah, color is very difficult to trademark, but you know, for those who succeed, that's, you know, again, you've got to choose the color carefully, because if you choose an industry color, that's not going to be distinctive. You're never going to be able to trademark that color for your brand, because it's rather like using a generic name. You know, the law basically will only grant a monopoly right over elements that other traders in that space don't need to use. So using an industry term or an industry color it's just the wrong approach to trademarks and choosing names. You know, people often want to describe what it is that their products or services offer, but that's really the wrong approach from a trademark perspective. You know, a bit like Club Card. But I'd love to know how it happens for an agency which has, you know, someone like Tesco as a client to end up choosing a name that can't function as a trademark. I guess I ought to approach them and ask them how that happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure that whoever did the naming for Tesco probably has a legal assistance. And maybe they thought Club Card was such a strong descriptive name that they would go with Tesco Club Card, which probably is protected. And
well, they tried hard to register Club Card on it.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, and they didn't succeed. So now it's gone to Tesco Club Card. I don't know.
I think another example is Apple iPhone. Wasn't that owned by somebody else?
iPhone, it might have been, but when you basically, brands that have a lot of money can buy out other people's rights. You know,
I think that Steve Jobs actually introduced iPhone without having the rights, and he just I suppose he relied on all that money that he could somehow steamroll over the opposition, but yeah, I think he introduced iPhone without having the rights to it.
Right. Well, it happens quite a lot in my experience. There isn't always communication between different departments, and things don't happen in the way they should ideally happen.
Well, he didn't do it because he didn't know. He did it deliberately, knowingly.
Oh, what? Because he knew someone else had the rights to it?
Yes, he did. And he decided he would do it anyway. I guess gambling that he could end up either winning the legal fight or buying them out.
Yeah, that's often a good strategy, as long as you're aware of what it is you're doing. And, you know, that can be your strategy, that you will litigate, you will buy someone's rights out. It's very difficult to actually find names that are available. And there's always a risk element. So I think,
But you know, he had the iPod and he had the iPad, and he thought that the iPhone was so important that he would undertake
yeah,
whatever risks were involved. And of course, he's pretty confident guy. He's passed away.
Yeah, he was a brilliant marketer. Yeah. So good. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for appearing on the podcast. Can you give me an example of any brand names that you think are really good, have been well chosen?
Oh, that's a good question. I've not thought about that. I tell you one thing, that my theory on names is that at the outset you have to make a choice. You have to make a choice as to whether you want a name that will describe what you do, because if you don't, that becomes a big communication problem. The name kind of gets in the way. Or you have to decide a name that's completely general. And that allows you to the flexibility to strategically do anything you want. And my favorite example is Amazon. When Amazon came out, people were thought, boy, if this company ought to be called books.com, because then they would have a home run. They would be able to dominate the whole space they're in, which was books. Instead, they called it Amazon. Well, that made the initial business entree very difficult. I mean, Amazon's got nothing to do with books, and they're trying to say this is where you go to buy books. Amazon is a huge river in South America, and it's the most powerful river in the world, and it has tributaries everywhere. And Jeff Bezos had a long-term vision that he wanted to sell everything, and he didn't want to call it books.com, so he called it Amazon.
I think even if he had wanted to just sell books, it would have been a very bad option from an intellectual property point of view to go with.
Well, that was his business. For a long time, his business was selling books. That was it.
Yeah, but Amazon, you see, he trademarked that straight away because it's the only way to have customers who are looking for you to find only you. As soon as you use names like books, you know, you have so much competition because other people will have sites like Books.co.uk or books, whatever, that, you know, you can't.
I disagree. I disagree. If you wanted to make a name yourself as the e-commerce bookseller, there's nothing better than books.com. Nothing. And that would give you a big advantage. But my general point is that this appears in almost every starting business. Every starting business has a choice. They can use a name that will represent what they're then doing, or they can represent a name that's more general and doesn't mean really anything. And that's everybody has that choice, books.com or Amazon. And you can make an argument for both ways.
I don't think from an IP point of view, you can actually. So many of these businesses that use names like pets.com, you know, they raised loads of money and they went bust because you can't get all the business that's destined for you when you're using a generic name. You know, therefore, it's like having a colander instead of a container of the brand value. You know, this is why IP is so important. And
I disagree with you. I think that if you want to start out a business and you're selling pets over the internet with e-commerce, there is no better name than pets.com. Now, there's a lot of reasons pets.com failed, and it's not because of the name, I don't think.
Oh, well, there's a really good book, The 22 Immutable Laws of the Internet, I think it is by the people who wrote positioning.
Well, I disagree with their fundamental premise. Their fundamental premise is you should never extend your brand. And that just doesn't make any sense. I once was I know both of the Rees, and they're wonderful people, and they made great contribution to branding. But I think they made a big mistake in their fundamental belief that you shouldn't extend the brand, that you should keep the brand within the confines of wherever it started.
Yeah, I mean, that might be...
I once asked them, would you call, if you were starting a theme park in the 50s and you were Disney, would you call it Disneyland? And they said no, because Disneyland meant cartoon movies. They wouldn't call it Disneyland. That's just crazy.
Yeah, but if I wanted to be known as IP lawyer, for example, and I got iplawyer.com, I would just get lost in a sea of sameness, because you can't uniquely own something like ip.com. That's why a name like Clubcard was such a problem, and books.com would have been the wrong strategy. I know from an IP point of view.
Well, if you own pets.com, nobody else can own pets.com because you own the URL.
Yeah, but it's not just about the URL. There's business out there apart from, online. And hotels.com tried to register hotels.com as a trademark. They haven't managed to, because it's really important to have a unique ability to use your identifiers. So when you've got a name that can't uniquely belong to you, I mean, yes, maybe you have hotels.com, but you can't uniquely own hotels.com in terms of offline. Other people could say, we are hotels.com, and you can't stop them.
Well, if they would they would be shooting themselves in the foot if they did that, because if the people that they convinced would say, well, I'm really interested in this outfit, I'm going to go to hotels.com. And they would reach their competitor.
Like that anymore for things. Often people will be given a URL that they can just click to and go to, and it might change when you get to the site. It might no longer be called the domain name that you had put as the URL. So you could still pretend that you're hotels.com, but when people click, it will actually go to something else, and they probably won't.
Well, I don't think I can argue with you on the legal side, because I don't know anything about the legal side, and you do. But I can say from a branding, naming point of view, there's, when you start a company, you do have to make a choice. If you want a name that helps you describe what you do, or if you want a name that will allow you to the flexibility to go in a whole bunch of different directions.
Yeah, well, my advice to people is usually when they're trialing the concept to use a descriptive name, because you don't then come up against the problem of trademarks. You can have books.com as your domain and trade as books.com. But a time comes once you've proven the concept when you need a brand name. And so you would just redirect your books.com to Amazon, say, if they'd started out as books.com. It's fine as a starting point, but it should never be the ultimate where you end up, because you can't have a unique brand. So you just change to have a brand at some point. It's whether
changing a brand is very, very difficult.
Yeah, which is okay in the early days when it's just generic. When you use books.com and you trial your concept and you see it works, then you can become amazon.com, and you still
that's very hard. It's very hard to change from books.com to Amazon.
If you become very well known, yes. So,
well, that's the whole point. If you don't become very well known, you're probably not going to be successful.
Well, you can still see whether it will take off or not. I think there are signs, within 3-4 months that.
But if it takes off, then you're stuck with that name. You can't.
No, you can still use it. You could still say, because people could still go to you as books.com, but they would arrive at a site that has a name and gradually get to know the true name of it. It's like calling a dog dog. If you get a dog,
I wouldn't advise anybody to go into something with the idea that when you get successful, you're going to have to change your name.
well, then I think they shouldn't start with a generic name, because that really limits the potential of a business.
Well, it's not so matter is it generic or not. I mean, test.com is a, but you can have a name that suggests pet stuff or pet
Yeah,
food, or
if it's Pets Are Us, that's a trademarkable name, like Toys R Us. That's a really good name. It's
not
distinct.
if you want to become Amazon.
No, if your long-term aspiration is to sell everything, then obviously it shouldn't be Books Are Us. It would have to be something else.
It's not strategically not obvious, because if you call it Amazon, you might never get started.
Yeah, but I think
There's a
it's
trade-off.
still easier to be Amazon than Google, or a totally made up name, because at least it suggests something. People are familiar with the name, whereas a totally made up name is even more difficult. You've got to put more advertising spend into it.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Good. Well, it's been really great talking to you, David.
Okay, thanks. Well, I've been glad to be introduced into the road, your world of trademarks and so on. I have to. I've learned something.
Yeah, I've learned something as well. That I'm really surprised that somebody such as yourself, who knows so much about branding, would think that a descriptive name is a good choice. So I've learned from that too.
That's not what I said.
No?
No, I said you have to make a trade-off.
Yeah. As to whether you want it easier for advertising.
Yeah, if you're gonna, it's gonna be better if you're gonna stick to that area forever. And it's going to be more difficult but better long term if you plan to expand your scope.
Yeah, which means you really need to have an idea of your long-term strategy and what you want to achieve for the business. Great. Okay. Well, how can people get in touch with you if they want to contact
you? You can reach my blog at davidaaker.com. Or Aaker on Branding, actually, is probably better. If you just Google Aaker on Branding, you'll go to the my blogs, and you can see what I've written.
Great. Lovely to meet you. Thank you very much for appearing on the podcast.
Okay, my pleasure.
Bye. That's it for this week. Do subscribe to the brandtuned newsletter to get weekly updates. I'd also love to get your feedback. Just send me an email to info@brandtuned.com. Finally, if you liked the episode, please do share it with your friends and colleagues and review it on iTunes or whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you leave us a 5-star review, it means more people will listen and we can spread the word much more quickly about the podcast. Thank you, and bye for now.